So we'll start the recording. Thanks, Connie. And my name's Joanne Yeomans. I'm the network manager of the Dutch Thematic Digital Competency Centre for the Natural and Engineering Sciences. So we were invited by Connie to do a presentation, or we've been allowed to do a presentation for the celebration of the Decade of Data for RDA. So we thought we'd do a little bit of context about how things have evolved in the Netherlands during the last 10 years, and therefore what the thematic digital competence centres are trying to do. First of all, to explain that we're actually a very small organisation. There's just 2 full-time members of staff and 1 very part-time assistant who helps us. So myself and Mira, as I explained, are the 2 full-time people. And we're hosted by Delft University at the moment, but we are not working for Delft. We're really in a new organisation that's just hosted by the university to give us office space. But we're really working nationally in collaboration with lots of people around the country that I'll explain in a second. So for those who don't know the Netherlands very well, I think it's worth explaining. It's a relatively small country in Western Europe. When it comes to universities, there are 13 actually in total, but only 11 of those have research from the natural and engineering sciences. And then there are a number of national research institutes, 9 of those in science and engineering. And there are 3 key service providers in science and engineering. So SURF, that offers IT services, the Netherlands eScience Centre that provides research software engineers to work collaboratively with academics on projects, and a data and software repository. We actually have 2, but one main one in the sciences, which is the 40U Research Data Repository. So they're the kind of key stakeholders, if you like, for what we're doing. And so it's a small enough country that we can do lots of co-working and working together. We can travel across the country in a few hours by public transport. But it's big enough for there to be a variety of things going on and quite a few people that we can work with. So if we look back at the last 10 years of the Netherlands, some of the key things that have happened connected with data was the formation also 10 years ago, so also celebrating 10 years anniversary this year, the formation of RDNL, which was a coalition of service providers that put together a national training programme. They offer a prize for good data sharing, and through the members, they provide infrastructure for data archiving. Then around that time, the major funders in the Netherlands started to explicitly address data sharing, and ZonMV and NVO, two of the main ones, started to require researchers to manage their data. So, of course, that puts a good impetus to the development of RDM. Then in 2016, the National Coordination Point for Research Data Management was set up. It's mainly a networking organisation that brings together all the kind of support staff connected with research data management. And they've had some very successful working groups producing reports in the past. They also set up a national mailing list for communicating. And so they were really a link between the policies that were being brought out at the time and the people who needed to then deliver on those policies. Also, during this period, the National Code of Conduct for Research Integrity was being developed or updated. It already existed, but it was being updated, and it included, from this point, a section explicitly on data management, as well as research software, codes, and other research materials. And that put a requirement on institutions to make sure that they provided the services that could ensure that researchers could deliver on this. So again, the pushes were coming from all the different sides for the development of RDM. And at the same time, of course, open science was a big topic of conversation. And the NPOS programme, the National Programme for Open Science, which started in 2017, had an interruption because of the COVID lockdown, of course, but a lot of reports were produced and policy guidance, one of which was the big report that was produced on professionalising data stewardship in the Netherlands. And you can see that on Zenodo. That led to certain changes in how people were recruited to job profiles corresponding to data stewards, and with career progression built in, and indications of the kind of training and skills that were needed. And so data stewardship became much more professionalized, and there's been a lot of recruitment in the Netherlands of data stewards during this period as well. And as a result of this program, there was a 2030 program designed, which is now being delivered by what's called Open Science NL, OSNL, which has a lot of funding every year. And hopefully we will be working with them and through them to deliver some of the projects that people want to work on in the future. Because part of that program has a strand on data, fair data, as well as another one on software, research software support as well. So they will be very important for us as a medium through which to work. So all of this resulted in this movement of different pushes and pulls in different directions to develop RDM in the Netherlands. Has also resulted in the setup of the 3 thematic digital competence centres. They were actually funded by the NVO, the National Research Council, as part of the implementation plan for investments in digital research infrastructure, which is a programme that funds some of the very big infrastructure programmes in the Netherlands, but also around Europe. So, for example, CERN, the particle physics laboratory, is funded through this programme. And it was acknowledged there that as well as having all this infrastructure, you also needed to develop in other areas, the support side, but also agreements on how to produce fair data, how to work on data and make it more interoperable and reusable. And so the thematic digital competence centres were set up in 3 domains to work then across Dutch research within these domains, and also connect with international initiatives. So that was sort of the birth of the 3 TDCCs. And what we will do is address challenges that go beyond individual institutions. We will do this through offering non-competitive funding for projects that the community want to work on. And we will therefore build and strengthen domain-specific communities. And because the funding comes from the ministry, but they want the community to be involved in deciding how to prioritise that funding, we need a kind of self-governance mechanism to decide on priorities and also how to use the money that's been allocated. I'll mention it again at the end, but of course there's more information on the specifics of all the 3 domains on our website. So you can have a look if what we're doing in some of the other domains is more interesting. I would suggest you have a look there. The project, if you like, is we're calling it a project, but it's foreseen to last for 10 years, which is quite long. And with the possibility that it will continue beyond 10 years into the future if it's deemed useful. So we've been through the first stage, which was to analyse the landscape and start up the TDCCs with staffing. And we've also kind of moved through phase 2, which was to shape some initial what we call bottleneck projects. And that's been happening in the last year since the staff were recruited. And we're now moving into phase 3, which is an open project call, where we'll work with the community to define some projects and allocate the initial tranche of funding. Then we're kind of probably about a year from now, we will start moving into the final phase, which will have another tranche of funding. And it will be up to the community to then discuss what the priorities should be and how we shape that programme for the next 5 years. So we're really in this sort of initial phases of figuring out how things work at the moment. But we hope in the second part of the programme, there's a more established pattern and everyone understands the processes. We tweak those to make sure they work. and we move forwards. And say, maybe after phase 4, there's a longer term need for these TDCCs to help move things forward in the future. So that will, of course, the review and decision about that will take part during this second phase, second part of the programme, the 4th phase. That will be a discussion that we will have. I think maybe I can just pause to see if anyone has any questions so far about the setup of the TDCCs. I can't see the chat and my slide.
I'm looking at the chat, Joanne, no problem. There's nothing coming through the chat yet.
Okay, that's fine. Then I'll carry on. And I think there'll probably be more questions later anyway. So what we've done so far is that we've, with the community, a roadmap was written that identifies the challenges for each domain and also identifies some initial bottleneck areas. And so then once that was done, there was a period of staff recruitment to then take forward the activities. And then so that's where Mira and I came in, and we started to engage with the community to meet people and help them develop some project proposals for the initial bottleneck projects. And we also started to initiate the community governance structure. And we've just had our first governing board meeting just a week ago. So that's what we focused on in the first year. The first projects have been approved, so we'll start very early next year. And during the next year, as I said, we have this open call at the moment going on, and we will have lots of events and engagement opportunities to increase collaboration, communication, discussion, and the formation of projects during the next year. So all of this resulting in, by 2025, the idea that we revise the roadmap, which guides the priorities and the areas in which we work. So when it was written, we didn't have AI, for example. There's also discussion about things like green computing that we might need to consider. Different services are coming, starting to appear, different training opportunities, for example, that are being carried out in other countries that we might take advantage of, different opportunities. So we will look at what we want to prioritise going forwards. So there will be a kind of evolution. So although we're working to a fixed roadmap at the moment, that will change, and we will see which direction we start to move in, and we will learn from how things have gone this first year. So where we actually fit is that we are not providing staff to work on any of these projects. We are really taking staff from different institutions across the country and trying to bring them together around topics that they want to work on and that they share in common, and trying to also put them in contact with the infrastructure providers or international groups where relevant, and help them develop the project. So we're facilitating the ideas, but we're not directly working on them ourselves. So it may be that some institutions are involved in one project but are not involved in all projects, and vice versa. The projects may include some representatives of the community, but not necessarily everyone who's interested in working on this, because one of the things, of course, we're finding is that there's a lack of capacity. So it's not possible for every single idea to be taken forward at this time, and it's not possible for everyone to work on something that they're interested in. So we're also going to organise opportunities to disseminate results and then make sure they're disseminated across all the stakeholders across the Netherlands.
Joanne, sorry, we do have a question in the chat, if this is a good moment. From Judith. So what are the bottleneck areas that the community identified in 2021?
I will come on to that very shortly, if you don't mind waiting a second. So the main stakeholders, more explicitly, that we're working with are the group of universities, as I mentioned, with science and engineering faculties, also the research institutes. And at the moment, I think it's fair to say that the universities and research institutes, when it comes to data management support are not particularly well connected. So although there are researchers that usually have a university affiliation working in these research institutes, the connection between the two organisations is not very strong. And we're also working with these key infrastructure providers. Again, I think it's fair to say that they have sometimes struggled with connecting with all these different stakeholders. So we're hoping to try and improve that connection and bring people together. And there are a number of network organisations and community groups that are more kind of bottom up in general, and they are good places where we can raise topics and use their media and their events to prompt discussion, but generally their aims are not the same as ours to organize projects. So we will use these connections to help bring people together around these topics of discussion, which I will get onto very soon. And MVO and the Open Science NL, of course, are going to be the main funders of all this work. So the reason there are 3 TDCCs is somewhat arbitrary, if you like. We do not aim to have a one-to-one correspondence with people from specific faculties. So we know that there are already overlaps in disciplines. So, for example, earth science can incorporate some aspects of life sciences and also some aspects of connecting with community and more social sciences. So there are big overlaps, of course, and we do not say that if you're working in this faculty, then you must work with this TDCC. No, the reason that the 3 domains were identified is more to congregate people around common challenges. So whereas in the social sciences, as you may be aware, there's a lot of qualitative data and sensitive data. In the life sciences, a lot of patient data and lots of small data collection going on, and a need to really harmonize that for machine level interoperability. And in the natural and engineering sciences, there's a lot more focus on research software. There's a very strong RDM skill set among researchers, but they're not necessarily connected with each other. And there's also recognized a need for increased human capital with the skills to help with data management and really collaborate directly with researchers. So we have slightly different challenges that dominate those domains, and that's why it was decided to divide into these 3 areas. It doesn't mean that we won't deal with some of these areas. So, for example, in NES, we also have people dealing with sensitive data and private data, and I say there are overlaps, so we are collaborating with each other quite closely as well. And here are the bottlenecks that you asked about. So for NES, we have 4 bottlenecks at the moment. One is the need to build community across the NES domain. So, chemistry is not necessarily talking to physics. Physicists are not necessarily talking to data stewards. So there's a real need to bring people together across this very broad domain. And make connections also outside the Netherlands as well, because a lot of people, of course, are working on big European or international projects. So we cannot make decisions in the Netherlands just for ourselves. We need to reach out and build those connections. There was a need for a training hub. There's a lack of training geared specifically towards NES domains. So a lot of training materials are still very broad and generic. And within NES, there's some very specific needs, and it's difficult to find training as well for the researchers. So there was the idea to create a more improved connection between all the training that's offered. Then software sustainability and preservation was identified as a key topic that needs to be addressed quite urgently. And I'll tell you a little bit about the 2 projects we have connected to that later. And then metadata and vocabularies to enable the INR in FAIR. And so we've got discussions going on all 4 of these areas, and we've had a few projects already submitted and approved. So I'll go into those in a little more detail later. The open call will address the more broader challenges that are identified in our roadmap, and each of these points it's just a bullet point on this slide, but there's a whole paragraph or several paragraphs in our roadmap explaining more about what the community believe was needed a couple of years ago. And so that will hopefully stimulate some ideas from people about what they want to work on. So improving FAIR, again, software, they're already mentioned in the bottlenecks. The connection to international activities is explicitly mentioned. Long-term data archiving is sometimes absent for some of these fields. Then also some more, a couple of things that are a bit more specific to NES. This idea of locating computing capacity close to the data storage. So especially when we're talking about large data sets, that we don't want to have to move them around for people to work on them. And so that was recognized as an issue. The need for increased human capital in this area and increased focus on RDM and software sustainability. And the last point is a bit more difficult to explain, but when we discuss this with researchers, we find this is something they often like, this developing community-owned and community-driven ecosystems. So they really want to be involved, not just have services provided for them, but really help with the design of systems that help them, but then also bring them together across disciplines to enable data sharing to go between domains or between disciplines. So I can pause here and just see if there are any questions about these areas, or whether that was clear. Connie, did you see any questions?
No, nothing else. A comment from me, but it's not really a question. It was just more of a general comment about obviously the Research Data Alliance possibly providing some kind of forum for
Yes.
the NES domain. I mean, obviously we have these communities of practice, and I'm just going to post a link in there now, but that might be something that you could tap into the RDA to help with.
Yeah, certainly. I wasn't able to attend the last plenary, but Mira was there, and we were looking at what was on the program that was in our domain, and it's kind of patchy. Yeah, so I think it might be nice to have some kind of collection of people interested more broadly, or at least try and address each discipline.
Yeah, no, that's right. So we do have some disciplinary groups in chemistry and physics and maybe material science. So maybe it's something that we can sort of talk offline now about at some point. There are some questions coming in, Joanne, now.
Yeah.
So there's one from Nanintha. Are there synergies between the TDCCs and the different ESFRI thematic clusters like EOSC Life? And then the SHOC community, social sciences. I don't know if Nanintha, you want to ask that out loud, by the way. I'm reading on behalf of people, but if you want to unmute, you are welcome to ask the question yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So no, I'm asking because this is sounds very similar to what the European Open Science Cloud and the research or the work program for research infrastructures had in Horizon 2020 with the S3 clusters on EOSC Life, for instance. Are there any synergies between the TDCCs here and the S3 clusters?
I would say at the moment we've not done very much international outreach and discussion or investigation, let's say, because Mira and I have only been in post just over 6 months, so we were focusing really on the setup in the Netherlands first, and so we have these sort of in our vision at the moment, and we're hoping next year that we can look at, fingers crossed, we're hoping we can get an extra staff member, which would mean that we could put a focus on this a bit more, because it's certainly an area we recognise we need to start engaging more with what's going on outside the Netherlands, at the same time as taking care of what's going on inside. So yeah, I hope that we can start to work more through EOSC. I know, I think there's one or two people here who are connected well with EOSC, and I think there are other groups as well going on, and there are other interesting things going on that we would also like to learn more about and connect with. Of course, there are people within our network who are already connected to some of these initiatives quite closely. So we're relying on them as well to make these connections and bring synergies into play. But I can't speak for Life and social sciences, because they are the other TDCCs focusing on those. But I know the LSH, the Life Science and Health, for example, is integrated with the Health RI in the Netherlands, which is the national infrastructure for health. And they are, for example, one of the Elixir hubs, and I'm not sure the terminology for their domain, but they are very closely involved in EOSC and all. Lots of other national.
Thanks. It's very interesting. I'm from the research funder in Norway, and this is a very interesting initiative. I think that we might contact you on later on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's partly why we were interested to do this webinar, because I say we recognize we need to start connecting, and we've already had a good conversation with some people in Germany, for example, through the NFDI work that's going on there. And we're hoping to build a collaborative project in chemistry, for example, that, as I'll mention a little bit more later. But we're trying to then make connections through our projects, let's say, at the moment. And how that develops, I'm not sure. I say we're a very early phase, really. So it will be interesting to see how this develops as we go along. But RDA, EOSC, obviously, key targets for us to connections. Oops, I think I clicked on that accidentally. So
there are a couple more questions if you can answer quite quickly, Joanne, if there's time for them. So one from Florian. So you wrote about community governance. Are there any ideas and words how this governance, or what this governance looks like?
Yes. Is that I can skip to that slide straight away. So we had some discussions, I think started probably in about, I think it was February or March this year. So we had an interim manager taking care of some of the initial work. And we had a first meeting across the country to get people's thoughts on how they would like to govern, certainly for the NES area. And from that, we developed a kind of framework, which was shared with the community again. People commented that we had a series of meetings, some one-to-one meetings, where people had a lot of comments or questions about it. And then over summer, we had a call for nominations. So we came up with this structure of a governing board, which at the moment has 18 members representing 18 of these key stakeholders. So all the universities, some of the research institutes, and then one organisation that represents a few of the research institutes, and people from these service organisations as well. But it is open to other members should they come up, and we have a number of people who have also asked to be observers of the governing board. So they receive the papers that and the agenda and can raise topics, but don't regularly participate. And from that, we have an executive team of 6 people who will work more closely with us. So the governing board will meet just twice a year, maybe 3 times this first year, but twice in the future, to really oversee the progress. And the executive team will work closely with Mira and I to make the progress during the year. And then we have 2 working groups set up, one a project development working group who will really help us interact with the projects and keep those focused on topics relevant to NES, and also help the projects develop teams that are representative across all the different stakeholders if possible. And then we have a very small programme committee who's going to help us with the programme for our first big event in February next year. We may set up other working groups as they come up. Some of these will be people from the governing board, but there may be other people as well. And so they are really focused on making sure that the projects deliver what people want them to deliver, but also that the whole structure is organised in a way that can address these topics. And they will help us interact with the funder to see how things are funded going forwards, because this is a new way of working for the funder as well. Normally they fund research in a competitive way. What they're doing with us is a much more collaborative way of working, non-competitive projects, and funding really a kind of infrastructure for the country, a national infrastructure. So it's very new to them, and so they're looking to our governing board to offer guidance and to discuss with them how to do this going forwards. So they have that higher level role as well. So that's how we're organised at the moment. I hope that answered the question. Any other questions I can maybe address?
There is one more and a comment here, so I don't know if you want to just answer them now. I don't know if you're doing okay for time, because I realise we've got 10 minutes left.
Yeah. Well, if then maybe could wait and then we look at
if you get through the presentation, we'll come back to them at the end.
Yeah. So very quickly, I just go back and mention that the roadmap, I say, really have a look at our roadmap if you want to see the details. It also had the initials ideas of how the governance would be set up as well. Although I have to say this was written how many years ago now? 2 or 3 years ago. And so already things have changed since then. And that's why we need to revise this. But it really gives a good background as to what we're trying to do, who the stakeholders are, how we will work. So I mentioned these non-competitive projects, and this is a very different way of working. So normally, I'm sure all of you are aware, there's a project call, you write a proposal, you submit it, and you hope it gets funded. We're not working like that at all. We're actually only submitting projects that we want to be funded. So MVO at the end of the process will have we'll have a committee that checks for their internal ethics and to ensure that the money is being spent how it was supposed to be in the original agreements. So they will do a final check, but every project we submit should get funded by MVO. So in order to get to that point, we have this whole process to develop the project ideas so that the community then agrees on that project and agrees it should be funded. And so at the beginning, the governing board and all our community will be involved in stimulating ideas for projects, sometimes through events, but also through their connections with their organisations. And then we're collecting very brief descriptions of projects that will then be considered by the governing board. And as long as they look like they're in line with what was defined in the roadmap and that there's enough money to fund all of them, they will then be given the green light to go to the next stage. It may be that we have to save some for a later moment and so make some priorities if there isn't enough money for all the projects. But the idea is ideally, we would fund anything that fits with the roadmap and looks like it's relevant to our domain and will be a successful project for the community. Then it will be given the go-ahead. And then it enters a process where we develop the idea. We will have open meetings to ensure that anyone who wants to be part of the project can be. We will try and recruit people to ensure there's some kind of representation. So people may have a much lower involvement in a project to make sure that it encompasses a wider group of people, but we will try and make sure that the idea is then refined by this group who are interested in it and developed, and that will be done with this project development working group I mentioned to make sure it stays in line with the roadmap. And then when there's a kind of consensus among the community around a project idea, and there's a group of people representing several institutions at least that are behind this idea, then they will be given the green light to go ahead and write the full project proposal. And to say, as long as we've got the funding, which we hope we will have for this first year, and as long as it's been developed in this open collaborative way, then it will be given a letter to accompany it with the submission to the funder. And then I say it should be that every project we submit is then funded. So it's a very different way of working. And so for this reason, the call is actually open for a whole year, so that we have the time to do this development. And this process of this way of working will also be evaluated by our governing board, and then we'll see whether we continue with this kind of process in future. It's what we've been using to develop some of the bottleneck projects already. So I can tell you about those. The open call has just opened in November, so we don't have any submissions yet, but we expect to have a whole group of them by February next year. But with the bottleneck projects, we already started the discussion a year ago. And so we've been following this process to build these projects. And so I can give you a summary of what's in progress or been approved. So around the community building, we've put in a request for events and opportunities to connect people in the future. So this was this TDCC NEST community building and project development application was actually from the staff team with the committee to make a plan of events for the next 2 years to ensure that we can bring people together and build these projects. Then we have another project that's looking at a coding cafe. It's already going on at a few universities, but the idea is to produce materials and help other universities start up coding cafes, so that ultimately there's a coding cafe in the same kind of format going on all across the country, and researchers can potentially then visit any of those, and we also have some kind of cross collaboration between institutes. That's in development. We expect it to be submitted for consideration early next year. Then in the training hub, we have a project in discussion, which will work with kind of fellows. I don't know if it's correct to call them fellows, but work with people to actually partner them. Maybe they could be research staff or new data stewards to then work with more experienced people and develop some new training materials, really focused on NEST domain topics and areas, and bring all these materials together in some kind of training hub. Again, that's in discussion, and we hope it goes through for approval next year. In software sustainability, we have 2 projects that have already been approved for funding, so these will start early next year. One is a very wide-ranging project, involves quite a lot of stakeholders, and it will look at developing guidance and tools and looking at how the software registry we have connects with the software repository, the 40U data repository, which also will take software, and then looking at training and community building and dissemination of best practices across the country. So that should be a very interesting project, I think, with a lot of outcomes. And the second one is one that's going to produce some advice that we will then hope to raise with policymakers and funders about how sustainable software is funded, and look at the risks if it's not funded. And this is how the situation is now. I think that a lot of software is produced during a project phase, and then there's no funding to maintain that, so it's done on voluntary bases or not at all. So I think that will also be an interesting project for many people outside the Netherlands. And then in the more fair and interoperability area, we have this chemistry project I mentioned. So this was actually a group of chemistry professors who came to us and said, you know, we really want to improve the fairness of chemistry data. How do we do that? We've been trying, but failing in the past. And so we're bringing them together with research software engineers, data stewards, and also making some connections, I say, with at the moment Germany, and then we hope through the NFDI for CAT group that we've been in contact with. We will, the Catalysis group, we will have connections through them, I think, with Switzerland and France, and also the UK and maybe others. So this might be a really nice project as well, that we hope then the format might be replicated in other disciplines, so that we can bring people together across from different disciplines. And a small project, but also potentially quite interesting, is one on a infrastructure that's been being used already at Eindhoven and I think one or two other places, which is using design engineering data, and they're wanting to make this software open source and build a community so that it's used more widely. And SURF is going to help with that as well. And we have some people from the eScience Centre, the research software engineers, also helping with that. So that's a smaller scale project, but nonetheless interesting, I think, to look at then workflows of making data fair. So those are the projects at the moment that we have. And during the next year, we're nearly out of time, we will focus on developing projects and also building connections with researchers in the Netherlands, but also outside the Netherlands as well, and different projects that are going on, not just researchers. So my question to you is, are you working on similar projects? Are these connected to our domain or to disciplines within that domain? And if you think collaboration with us would be mutually beneficial, then please get in touch with us, because I say we want to make that a focus going forwards to ensure our projects really have a good impact. So a reminder of the projects, but I say you can find more on our website through the roadmap is probably the best place to look. And if you want to be updated on our progress, then we do have a newsletter that we put out roughly every 2 months. So you can just get a reminder of what's been happening, and we will announce projects and things through that. So that's the end of my slides. It didn't leave much at the end for question time, I guess, but hopefully I answered a few during the session. Do you think there are any others, Connie?
I was just going to say, if people need to drop off the call, of course, now, please feel free to do so, because we are at time. But there are a few questions in the chat if you've got time to answer, Joanne. One from Adil. So are you concerned with harvesting of metadata and data by commercial entities, such as AI, where inferences between data may be commercialized?
Well, of course, I don't think that's something that we as a TDCC have any should make any decisions about. That's for our community, I would say, to decide on what happens. We are there to make connections between people. So maybe there needs to be a discussion about this and we can help. And I certainly think AI is going to come up as a new topic that needs to be addressed on the new roadmap. How that's done, we will see. What are the issues people are most concerned about? But say maybe we can facilitate events to discuss that with the community, or for the community to discuss that with each other, and then they can make a decision. But we are here to facilitate rather than to decide on these things ourselves.
Thanks, Joanne. A comment from David. So it may be important. I don't know if somebody else wants to ask a question in a second, but it may be important to fund projects focusing on aligning with the rest of the world versus funding reinventing the wheel.
Yes, exactly. That's what we're hoping to do. So that's why we the connection with NFDI came about because I attended the Cordi conference. I don't know if any of you were there was it September in Germany? And when I saw what they were working on and that this was what our chemists wanted to work on, and I saw that there was we were going to duplicate each other if we weren't careful, then we reached out, and we're going to have another conversation in December with them to look at whether we work on the same things from complementary areas, or whether in Germany they work on one part and we work on something else completely different, so that we're not duplicating each other's work. So we're definitely looking to make efficiencies in how we distribute the work and not reinvent the wheel at all. So yes. And I think some of our stakeholders, the eScience Centre, for example, who's leading the software project, are very well connected internationally. So they are using what's going on elsewhere and bringing it to the Netherlands and adapting things. So there's definitely a focus to do that.
Thanks, Joanne. And a final question from the chat from Thomas, and I think you've also just put this back out actually to the participants. So do you know similar organisations from neighbouring countries? And obviously then you've also mentioned that, I think, as well in your previous answer there. So there is some overlap with other organisations.
Is this a question because you don't know, or that you want to tell me of some? Because I would love to know
was a question in the chat.
I would love to know similar organisations so that to help us connect. But I say that if you don't know about them, the NFDI work interest groups, I'm not sure what they call them, interest groups or working groups, cover all the domains. They've got so many, about 26 I think it is at the moment, in different domains, really working on all the kind of things I've talked about. So there's a very interesting collaboration opportunity for anyone else looking to work in this area. I know we've done a bit of research to find out what's going on in some of the other bigger European countries, so France, UK, and one or two others, but it's not always easy to find out. So maybe this is something RDA can help with, to bring people together so that we can explain how things are organized and see how to connect with each other. Because that is one of the most difficult things, I think, in working in this area, that there's so much going on and you only have a limited amount of time, but also brain space to figure out how to work with all these different groups and who to connect with and who are the important connections. So it is a tricky environment to try and work in, but that's of course what makes it exciting as well, isn't it? Right, there's lots going on. So I
think Thomas might have actually wanted to speak to his question.
Yes, but in the meantime, Jana already answered my question, because it was really to see, because I didn't know of any organization which are similar in neighboring countries, especially to Germany, where I'm from. And now I know this NFDA, which you talked about.
Yeah.
Now. Okay.
If shall I just stop the share, by the way, and I can maybe in the chat then for anyone who, I can just type the NFDI is in fact, because I know letters in different languages are different, so NFDI in Germany, and I say they have this NFDI and then the number 4, a different discipline. So they have so much going on. It's really worth looking at that. And maybe in the chat people can post their own websites or links or names of organizations. But we're also in touch with the UK Physical Sciences Data Service, is it PSDI? PSDF, which is obviously in the physical sciences, trying to do things with very little funding, I understand. And then beyond that, I know in France there's also a group that's sort of chemistry, physics. I forget the name, I'd have to look it up. I don't know if there are people here from there. I don't know if it's, I'm not sure where it's based, but they have a website where they appear to be doing different similar things to this, working on FAIR data repositories. Data, thank you for this Belgian links. That's great. Yeah, and I really think indeed, Connie, there would be benefit in bringing together some of these people who can explain how things are organised and what they're working on. As I say, I found it very useful in Germany, and I think others would find it useful just to get an overview of different projects, and we can try and build this synergy and make sure we're not all competing with each other, but rather working together.
I agree. I think if we should try to probably wrap up now. I don't know if anybody has any final questions, but there was a question also, Joanne, about making these slides available. So I'll make the recording available afterwards. And obviously, if you're happy to share the slides, I'm sure that would be very valuable to the community.
Yeah. Can you share them through the RDA website?
I will do that, yes. And I will reach out to everybody after the event as well.
Yep, that's no problem at all.
Okay, we see some links coming in the chat, which is great. Any final questions before we leave? Okay. Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah, I covered everything. Yeah, thanks to everyone for coming. It was really nice to have you all here.
Thank you for your engagement, everybody. I'll follow up with an email with the links. Thank you. Have a great day. Have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.